the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump over the weekend will have an impact on both presidential campaigns.
Will it tone down political rhetoric? Could it bring some unity? What has history taught us? Joining us this morning to cover that and much more is Andrew Polsky, professor of political science at Hunter College. Thank you for joining us, Professor. We're going to look at this from a big picture standpoint, first of all. Right, so this is not the first assassination attempt on a president or a former president, but it's the first one in a generation. Can you kind of put this in perspective?
Well, I think we're all shocked by what happened. Not necessarily surprised, because there has been very overheated political rhetoric on both sides throughout this presidential campaign. We know very little about the shooter's motives. We can make guesses, but that's all they are at this point. What will happen now? Well, I think that there will be a boost in Donald Trump's popularity in the short term, at least. He survived this. He came out with a strong expression of his determination to continue. And then we're going into the Republican convention. And conventions generally give candidates a boost because they monopolize coverage of the campaign for several days. In recent campaigns, the boost has been small because people haven't been tuned into the conventions. This year, a lot of people will tune in and watch Donald Trump speak to hear what he has to say.
Do you think, we've heard both sides, leaders in both sides, say we need to tone down the rhetoric. We need to have more unity. The way things are, do you think that that will actually happen, certainly long term between now and the rest of the election season?
No. Long term, no. I think for a couple of weeks, for a short period of time, many people will tone down the rhetoric, although not everyone. Already there are fingers being pointed, so I think that's a short-term phenomenon. But the polarization that's behind the rhetoric is still there. That doesn't change. And I think that's what will surface again as we go forward.
Professor, I don't know if you remember, but last week we were talking about whether they were going to force President Biden to sit out this election.
Yes.
Where is that in the mix of things?
Well, I think that conversation quiets for at least a few days, maybe a couple of weeks. I think essentially the campaign's frozen. And that's important because there wasn't that much time for Joe Biden to make that decision one way or another. And now we're going to, you lose effectively a week or two, I think, where there's very little of that discussion. Meanwhile, what we've seen is a kind of war of op-ed pieces on both sides. With George Clooney has an op-ed piece saying Biden should step down, and then Bernie Sanders has one that says no, he should stay in the race. So there's the op-ed pieces as a kind of attempt by people to force Joe Biden out of the race by news leaks, because people won't directly tell him to step down, but there's the conversations. The White House is looking at Kamala Harris. The White House is considering this or that alternative. None of it's on the record. So people are trying to shape the thinking as they go forward. But again, I think it's going to be frozen for a couple of weeks.
Has there ever been anyone in history where behind the scenes, and now it's actually not even behind the scenes, it's very vocal, where they actually tried to convince the president not to run for re-election?
No, the closest parallel that people point to is 1968, when Lyndon Johnson decided to not run again. And he did so particularly after the New Hampshire primary, when he did much worse than expected.
Finished third, right?
He didn't finish third, but it was so close that it effectively was a defeat for Johnson, and he decided then to step back. Now, of course, that was much earlier in the process. It all depends on what Joe Biden decides to do. He has the delegates. He doesn't have to withdraw, and the delegates are committed to him. The rules basically don't allow the delegates to vote any other way. So unless Biden does withdraw, he will go forward as the Democratic nominee. I think Donald Trump gets a short-term boost in the popularity because of what's happened here. And if he gives a certain kind of speech at the convention, a speech in which he acts more presidential and sets a different tone, he's aiming at the undecided voters or the voters in the middle. That could have a more lasting impact going forward than anything else that happens in the short run.
So speaking of undecided, people have said, hey, undecideds haven't paid attention. You know, it's still June or July, and so nobody's really. Do you think this assassination attempt brings more undecided people into paying attention to really what's going on now, which will help one side or the other?
Well, I think in the short run, undecided voters will pay more attention. People will be focused, especially on Trump's speech this week. I don't know that that gets sustained through the summer and into the fall. And the election probably will turn on what we call low information voters, people who don't pay attention to politics and who tune in very rarely and mostly toward the end, and who can be influenced by events that happen very close to the election. And that's what we can't predict at this point. No one knows what will happen between now and Election Day that could suddenly change the temper. But as far as I can see right now, there isn't much of a path forward for Joe Biden that looks encouraging, because they've tried almost everything they can. They've thrown a lot of money into the advertising. They've hit on all the themes they think will work, and it hasn't. Basically, public opinion is largely frozen, and with Trump having a small but significant lead in most of the key states.
Why is it Kamala Harris is not... Why doesn't she have traction?
Kamala Harris, first of all, I think she may turn out to be, if she's running, and I think she's the logical alternative to Joe Biden, a very effective candidate, because she's very articulate and she speaks well on key issues.
Not everybody agrees with that.
No, of course not.
But people who disagree are
Right.
disagreeing for political reasons.
But I think
if you listen to the woman speak, she's articulate.
Yeah.
Yes.
But she's also associated closely with some of the less successful or more unpopular Biden policies, especially the immigration situation over Biden's first several years in office, where immigration was not controlled effectively. Even in many cities like New York, local politicians were saying the administration needs to do something, and Kamala was front and center in that policy, and I think that hurts her a great deal going forward in the campaign.
Yeah.
And one last question for me, at least, about if Biden winds up sticking it out and being the Democratic candidate. You say you see no path forward for him. Like, how does he even progress? Because people say he needs to be more fiery and show enthusiasm and go after Trump. Well, a lot of that got taken away from a political standpoint, once again,
yes,
with the assassination attempt this weekend. So what can he do as a candidate, period?
Well, he's been in a cocoon. He's been too sheltered. He's missed opportunities, I think, to show that he's capable and competent. I think he'll have to do more of that constantly from now through the election to reassure people that he can still be an effective president as he ages into his second term.
Well, we thank you so much for the insight. We appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you, Professor.
Professor Polsky from Hunter College.